Immediately, Daddy told us to gather our belongings and go to our house in Pennsville 72nd, where Sister Co passed. As I began to gather my clothing and other valuable things of mine, my stepmother told me to put my clothing down and take her children's clothing. She stuffed her two girls' clothing in a 100-pound rice bag with other items I was unaware of and demanded that I take the bag. I tried to refuse, but Daddy agreed that I put my suitcase down and take his girlfriend's children's clothing instead. He commented that we were coming back within the next couple of days. Therefore, it was not necessary that I bring my clothing with me. Angrily, I took the bag and laid it on the surface of my head. Seike, on the other hand, put Daddy's girlfriend Rosa's suitcase on his head, and then Daddy took the remaining pot full of jollof rice and put it on his head. We then embarked on the journey to Pennsville on foot. Thousands of people were running and rushing with their belongings with all kinds of luggage fleeing the city. The house in Pennsville was about a 15-minute walk away from Daddy's apartment. We took shortcuts behind Daddy's apartment and embarked on our journey to the house. We headed in the path of the Methodist church where Sister Co's wake and funeral was held. Also, her grave was a 5-minute walking distance away from the church. At this time, Daddy, his girlfriend, and her two daughters, and Seike were speed walking. I took my time walking, praying, singing, and asking my sister to watch over me. As we drew closer to the Methodist church, I began to feel dreadful in my spirit. I called on my sister for guidance. I spoke out loud telling her goodbye and that I needed her to watch over me as I passed the church. As we moved towards 72nd, an intense battle was beginning again. Bullets were flying everywhere. Straight bullets were knocking people out as they were running on the streets. 72nd was one of the locations of the army barracks, and the rebels were fighting to take it over, but the army resisted. The exchange fire became heavier and heavier as we advanced. Daddy and everybody else ran as they held tight to their baggage on their head. On the other hand, I was still taking my time. I continued to walk and pray, calling on God for help and asking my sister to watch over me. Upon reaching a creek at the bottom of a hill, I attempted to cross the creek, but I slipped off a log into the water. When I lifted my head and called for help, Dad and his girlfriend continued to move forward. His concern was with his girlfriend and her two little girls. Seike kept looking behind, encouraging me to hurry. He kept waiting for me, but the bullets were flying our way. So he had no choice but to continue walking. He looked behind many times. So was Daddy with little care, till they got out of view. I got up and climbed the hill. When I got to the top of the hill, all I could see was abandoned houses and trees. There was nobody in view. I was alone. I could see the crowds ahead of me continue to get further and further ahead. I also could see Daddy walking toward the back road. I tried very hard to follow him. We were the only people on the back road. I guess he knew our destination, unlike many who did not know where they were going. Fortunately for me, the shortcut to the Pennsville house was familiar. Before Sister Co died, I used to skip out of the house in Pennsville to take the shortcut to Daddy's apartments. Since I knew where they were going, I was not bothered about them going ahead. I continued to take my time to meet them at the house, even though the gun sounds were still heavy and bullets were flying everywhere. As I attempted to take the next shortcut, another rebel with red cloth tied around his head and his gun yelled, calling my attention, "Hey, kid, come here." "Where are you from?" he asked shrewdly. My daddy already told us to tell the rebels that when they asked us, we should tell them that we were from Nimba County and not to call them rebels because they prefer themselves as freedom fighters. They didn't like to be called rebels. So, I called them freedom fighters. He asked what tribe I was from, and I told him Mono, and then he asked me to speak it. Though I didn't know the entire language, I could understand it. I had learned it over the years from my grandmother and my mother, so I spoke the little I knew. Having spoken English all my life, I had a little English accent. He was satisfied with what he heard, and my attitude also helped. I was laughing and smiling at him. He then asked me where I was going. I told him, 72nd. Immediately, he said, "Take the main road. The shortcuts are bad. Some soldiers are still hiding in those shortcuts, so take the main road." Then he said, "God be with you." I told him thanks and continued to walk with my load on my head. I could actually see the main road. It was just 5 minutes away to Pennsville, so I thought it would be a good idea. As I approached the main road, there were a group of rebels dressed in red cloth on their guns and around their heads, with AK-47s and Berettas across their chests, and in the other hands, knives and bazookas. When they spotted me coming from the back instead of the main road, they started shooting upward. I believe they intended to scare me, but because I met the other rebels earlier, I wasn't afraid of them. As I drew close to them, They asked me the same question the first guy asked me. One of them could barely speak English. He spoke broken Liberian English. Again, I told him I was headed to 72nd. I told him I got separated from my family, but I knew where they were headed, so I was going to them down the street. Then he said, "I am sorry, kid, you cannot go over there. Your parents are probably dead by now. There is an intense battle going on between us and the government forces. We are fighting to take over the barracks, and it may last for a few more days, so do not go there. If you want to live, do not attempt going in that direction." I became cold inside. My heart began to beat hard, and my mind wandered to places that depressed my soul. Tears came rolling down my cheeks. I had nowhere else to go. I was alone. I pleaded to him, asking him if I could take a chance. Then he put his hands on my shoulder like he had known me for years and pointed to the hundreds of civilians exiting the city, tramping over dead bodies. "Follow those people. God will be with you." He spoke mildly to me. I had no choice but to follow the crowd. Now it was not sweet anymore. No more fun that I thought my brother and my dad would have been dead, even my stepmother whom I didn't like. The crowd moved in such a violent force like rushing water. I had to catch up with them. So I finally began to run. Tears were running down my face as I moved toward the crowd. I had just turned 11. Though I always acted older than I was, I suddenly felt like I was just a kid. I needed my mother and father now. My heart was filled with fear, and my mind was hoping that I could make it, as my eyes could not handle all the fresh dead bodies lying on the side of the road. Some people had been shot, mostly the Kron and Mandingo. Though I had been excited like many others when the war began, I was not so excited anymore when I was tramping over all those dead people. Some bodies had knives stuck in the stomach, some were just slaughtered and still had not given up their last breath. Now, I began to get really scared for my life. I had no clue where I was going, no sense of my future. I felt dead and helpless. As little as I was, I kept falling to the ground while people came running and hitting against me. My only hope now was God. There was a saying during the war that goes, "Everybody for themselves, God for us." That was exactly what was going on. Nobody was picking up other people's kids, especially strangers' kids, for fear that they might be picking up a child from another tribe. Children at my age were also soldiers. I dangled among the crowd, falling and springing back up as I saw blood everywhere on the streets and people's heads and bodies all over the place on the sidewalks and roads. I kept fighting my way through the crowd as they kept coming against me. Compared to the crowd, my speed was like a snail, so I was left behind again by this crowd rushing out of the city. I did not know how to walk fast. Before all this, I have either ridden in my mother's car or taken a taxi everywhere I went. I walked only short distances in which I took my time, and I did not have to walk fast. In the midst of this crisis, the reality was that my chances of survival were thin as a thread. No one cared for me. Everybody was running for their lives. Other kids like me were by themselves running for their lives, but they were fast as an eagle moving along with the wind. What could I do? Who could I depend on? What would become of me? All those thoughts were going through my mind. I felt like a dry leaf that soon would be trampled over, dead and gone.